There is something about San Francisco in the 1960s that people who lived through it can't forget. It was a decade painted in electric color, where the air carried the scent of incense and rebellion, and where young Americans searching for meaning found themselves drawn to a city that seemed to pulse with possibility. For many who walked its streets, the memories are still vivid. The bold tie-dye hues, the sound of guitars drifting from open windows, and the feeling that life could be reimagined from the ground up. To those who were there, these images were not trends or cliches. They were the rhythm of daily life. The protests against the Vietnam War, the calls for peace, the rise of new music, and the unshakable belief that society could be changed. These shaped not only a generation, but the very identity of San Francisco. If someone lived through it, they know exactly what made that decade so distinctive. And as we look back on this extraordinary era, something powerful happens. Memories surface, moments long tucked away return with a clarity that surprises us. This opening is an invitation to step into that world once more, to walk those streets again, and to rediscover what it was truly like to live in San Francisco in the 1960s. To understand what everyday life in the city truly felt like, we have to look at the forces that shaped it beneath the surface. The 1960s were a time when San Francisco became the epicenter of a cultural awakening that swept across the United States. The country was changing, and the city felt that change more intensely than almost anywhere else. Young people from every corner of America were arriving with nothing more than a backpack, a dream, and a belief that life did not have to follow the rules their parents had known. As they poured into neighborhoods like Haight-Ashbury, the streets began to transform into a living symbol of youth, freedom, and experimentation. This migration reshaped the city's character almost overnight. Rents were low enough to allow shared houses, art collectives, and communal living spaces to flourish. Cafes overflowed with students and musicians discussing politics, philosophy, and the future of the country. The rising tension of the Vietnam War pushed many to speak out, fueling massive protests across Berkeley and San Francisco. Every march, every sign, and every chant carried the weight of a generation demanding a different world. At the same time, deeper movements were taking root. The fight for civil rights gained strength, women began challenging long-standing expectations, and the first signals of LGBTQ+ liberation emerged quietly but unmistakably in pockets of the city. San Francisco became a place where people who felt unseen elsewhere could finally find a voice. Each movement added another layer to the city's identity, creating an energy that was impossible to ignore. This convergence of youth, politics, and cultural momentum shaped San Francisco in ways that still echo today. And with the foundation of the decade set, it becomes easier to step into the daily life that unfolded within it. With the forces of the decade setting the stage, it becomes possible to step closer and see what life in San Francisco truly felt like beyond the headlines and movements. The broad sweep of history is important, but the heart of the era lives in the rhythms of ordinary days, in the way people gathered, created, and dreamed together. Let's walk through what daily life actually felt like in San Francisco during this remarkable decade, and step into the world that so many still remember with clarity and emotion. Everything begins at home, where the energy of the 1960s touched every corner of daily living. Daily life in San Francisco during the 1960s often began inside the city's distinctive Victorian and Edwardian homes, buildings that stood like ornate time capsules against the turbulence of the decade. Their tall windows, curved staircases, and colorful facades would later be known as the Painted Ladies. But to those living through the era, they were simply the backdrop of everyday existence. Rents were low enough for young people, artists, and travelers to share space, creating houses where strangers became temporary families. Communal living didn't feel unusual. It felt natural, a reflection of the belief that life was meant to be lived together rather than apart. Step inside one of these shared homes and you would immediately sense the texture of the decade. Shag carpets softened the creaking wooden floors, their deep colors catching the glow of lava lamps perched on low tables. Psychedelic posters covered the walls in swirling patterns that seemed almost alive, announcing local concerts, poetry readings, or simply the spirit of peace and love. Incense drifted through open hallways, mixing with the sound of vinyl records spinning Janis Joplin or Jefferson Airplane. Even the clutter felt intentional. Stacks of books, borrowed jackets, half-finished paintings, and hand-stitched crafts, each a quiet expression of someone searching for meaning. Technology inside the home remained simple, yet it carried a certain charm that many remember fondly today. Most households owned a black and white or early color television, its rounded edges and warm screen glow turning every evening broadcast into a shared ritual. Transistor radios offered a portable soundtrack to daily life, allowing music to drift from room to room or follow someone out the door. Super 8 film cameras captured birthdays, street festivals, and moments with friends in grainy, flickering frames that still feel intimate decades later. Rotary telephones anchored kitchen counters, their familiar clicks marking every dialed number. Beyond the objects and decorations, what people often remember most is the feeling inside those homes. Doors were rarely locked, meals were often shared, and music flowed freely, blurring the boundary between private space and community. Life was lived out loud, shaped by the belief that connection mattered more than possessions. Even in moments of uncertainty, there was a sense of belonging that made these homes feel like sanctuaries from a changing world. This look became instantly recognizable as 1960s San Francisco style. Life in San Francisco during the 1960s was shaped not only by the homes people lived in, but also by the way they moved through the city. Stepping outside, residents entered a landscape where every street seemed to carry its own rhythm. The cable cars rattled along their historic tracks, offering a slow and scenic ride that felt almost timeless. Buses wove through the city's hills, connecting neighborhoods that were rapidly filling with students, artists, and young travelers. And everywhere you looked, you could spot the iconic Volkswagen Beetle or the beloved VW bus, vehicles that became symbols of the decade as much as the music and art themselves. Few images from the era are as instantly recognizable as the brightly painted Volkswagen buses that crowded the streets near Haight-Ashbury. Covered in peace signs, flowers, and swirling patterns, they reflected the spirit of a generation that believed movement, both physical and cultural, should be free and expressive. Many young people preferred to walk, carrying guitars or backpacks as they drifted between parks, cafes, and gatherings. Others hitchhiked, trusting the kindness of strangers and the unspoken understanding that everyone was part of something larger than themselves. The streets felt alive, not just with traffic, but with intention and possibility. Transportation during this time also revealed how the city was changing beneath the surface. Gas was inexpensive, making it easy for working families to rely on cars, while the influx of youth created a constant hum of motion around the city. Haight Street grew crowded, not with commuters, but with vibrant communities of pedestrians and cyclists. Even the traffic jams carried a different mood, less frustration, more curiosity, because the city attracted people who came to watch, to listen, and to belong. Movement was not just a practical act, it was part of the identity people were building together. Driving was not just transportation, it was identity. Before we continue with the culture and traditions that define this era, if you are enjoying this look back and want to explore more decades and places, consider subscribing. There are so many more stories about how people built the life we know today, and your support helps keep these memories alive for future generations. And while you're here, feel free to share which part of the 1960s left the strongest impression on you. Your reflections help shape the next chapters of this journey into America's past. With the scene set and the spirit of the decade taking shape, The heart of San Francisco in the 1960s comes alive most vividly through its culture. Nowhere was this more evident than in the music that poured out of parks, ballrooms, and tiny neighborhood apartments. The city became a magnet for musicians who were redefining what sound could be, blending rock, folk, blues, and experimental tones into something entirely new. Grateful Dead rehearsed in shared houses before performing free concerts in Golden Gate Park. Jefferson Airplane brought a soaring electric energy that echoed through the Fillmore West, one of the most influential music venues of the era. Janis Joplin, with her raw and unmistakable voice, became a symbol of emotional honesty and unrestrained expression. Santana emerged from the Bay Area with a fusion of Latin rock that captivated crowds and helped broaden the city's musical identity. Music in San Francisco wasn't just entertainment, it was a declaration of freedom, a living pulse that united thousands. Being in San Francisco meant being at the center of the psychedelic music revolution. Fashion during this decade carried the same spirit of transformation. Clothing wasn't merely a choice, it was a visible expression of values, dreams, and rebellion. Tie-dye shirts swirled with bright, unpredictable patterns, each one handmade and deeply personal. Long skirts, ponchos, and flowing fabrics reflected the desire for natural movement and a break from formality. Many young people repurposed military jackets as quiet protests against the ongoing Vietnam War, while handmade jewelry, beads, and headbands became powerful symbols of individuality. The look was unmistakable, loose, colorful, and unafraid. It captured a mood that many older Americans today still remember clearly, because it marked a moment when clothing announced who you were and what you believed in before you even spoke. Television and film also played a distinct role in shaping the experience of the decade. Families gathered around early color TVs to watch new series that pushed boundaries and opened imaginations. Star Trek premiered in 1966, offering bold ideas about the future, diversity, and exploration that resonated deeply in a decade defined by change. I Dream of Jeannie brought humor and fantasy into living rooms, becoming one of the light-hearted escapes people cherished after long days filled with political tension and cultural upheaval. In San Francisco, independent theaters embraced the avant-garde, screening experimental and art films that reflected the city's creative momentum. People captured their own stories through Super 8 cameras, documenting street performances, gatherings, and everyday adventures in flickering frames that still hold emotional weight for those who lived through them. LP vinyl records lined the shelves of apartments, turning music, listening into a shared ritual, while psychedelic poster art became a language of its own, announcing concerts and expressing ideas that words alone could not. This defined the visual culture of the decade. If this era holds a special place in your memories, consider sharing the name of a band, a show, or a moment that shaped your youth. Your stories keep the history alive, and someone else watching may feel the same spark of recognition. As powerful as the city's music, fashion, and media culture were, what truly set San Francisco apart in the 1960s were the neighborhoods and communities that existed nowhere else in America. Each area carried its own personality, and together they formed a mosaic of creativity, idealism, and rebellion. Haight-Ashbury stood at the center of it all, a place where young people from across the country gathered to build a lifestyle that rejected materialism and embraced freedom. Its streets were filled with musicians tuning their guitars on front steps, artists painting on sidewalks, and groups of friends sharing meals, ideas, and dreams without hesitation. For many, it became the spiritual home of the counterculture, a neighborhood that captured the hope and turbulence of the decade in every corner. Not far away, Golden Gate Park served as the city's open-air stage. On sunny afternoons, thousands gathered for free concerts by Grateful Dead or Jefferson Airplane, or to participate in events like the Human Be-In of 1967, which blended music, poetry, and peaceful protest into one unforgettable moment. The wide lawns and winding paths of the park became places where strangers connected easily, drawn together by a feeling that they were part of something larger than themselves. At the same time, another transformation was beginning in the Castro district, where early expressions of LGBTQ+ identity quietly took root. Though small at first, these early steps laid the foundation for a movement that would grow far beyond the decade. Combined with lingering influence from the beat poets who once gathered in North Beach, San Francisco became a city defined by openness, artistic courage, and a belief in living authentically. This mixture made the city unlike anywhere else in the country. Food in San Francisco during the 1960s reflected the same spirit of diversity and openness that shaped its culture and neighborhoods. Walking through the city, you could taste the influence of the many immigrant communities that had made San Francisco their home. Chinese restaurants in Chinatown served dishes that many Americans were trying for the first time. Italian cafes in North Beach offered espresso and pastries that drew artists, writers, and students late into the night. Mexican eateries, especially in the Mission District, introduced flavors that soon became part of the city's everyday rhythm. These meals were more than food, they were small windows into different worlds, shared around tables filled with conversation and curiosity. Among the emerging youth culture, new eating habits quickly took hold. Vegetarian meals and macrobiotic diets became popular within the hippie community, not just as health choices, but as reflections of broader values: simplicity, harmony, and rejection of excess. Homemade bakeries and cozy cafes appeared throughout Haight-Ashbury, offering fresh bread, soups, and simple dishes that people could enjoy while listening to live music or discussing the issues of the day. These places became informal gathering spots where friendships formed easily and where ideas flowed as freely as the music outside. Even though fast food chains like McDonald's had begun to grow nationally, they held far less influence in San Francisco's counterculture circles. What mattered most was connection, sitting together, sharing meals, and savoring the sense of community that food helped create. These flavors defined everyday life in the 1960s. Yet, even in a decade filled with color, creativity, and youthful optimism, San Francisco faced challenges that became impossible to ignore as the 1960s drew on. The rapid influx of young people, many arriving without steady incomes or long-term plans, strained the city's resources in ways few had anticipated. What began as a hopeful migration soon created overcrowding in neighborhoods like Haight-Ashbury, where once affordable homes became packed far beyond their intended capacity. Streets that had felt vibrant and communal now carried signs of exhaustion as the city struggled to keep up with the needs of its growing population. Crime also began to rise, especially toward the end of the decade, as desperation mixed with the pressures of urban life. While many came seeking peace, not everyone found stability, and the darker side of drug use emerged as stronger substances, particularly heroin, began to circulate. These changes cast long shadows over communities that had once felt unified by hope. For older residents, the shift was striking. The same streets that had brimmed with music and idealism now revealed a more fragile reality beneath the surface. At the same time, redevelopment efforts in areas like the Fillmore District disrupted long-standing black communities. Families who had lived there for generations were displaced as buildings were demolished and property values shifted. The promise of renewal came at a painful cost, altering the cultural fabric of one of the city's most historic neighborhoods. These were difficult truths of the era, reminders that transformation rarely arrives without turbulence. But most people accepted this as part of the era. Looking back at all the beauty and turbulence woven into this extraordinary decade, one word rises above the rest to capture the spirit of San Francisco in the 1960s: rebellion. It was not rebellion for the sake of conflict, but a deep, urgent desire to redefine what life could be. People questioned old traditions, challenged rigid expectations, and dared to imagine a society shaped by equality, creativity, and compassion. This spirit flowed through every corner of the city, from the parks filled with music to the crowded communal homes where strangers became family. It was a rebellion that carried hope, rather than anger, and it left a mark that still lingers in the memories of those who lived through it. For the people of that era, it was a time of extraordinary freedom. Music drifted through open windows, friendships formed easily, and the future felt wide open, as if anything was possible with enough courage and imagination. Houses were affordable, communities were close, and conversations stretched late into the night as young Americans tried to make sense of a world in rapid transformation. Even decades later, many can recall the glow of those moments, the colors, the sounds, the shared belief that life did not have to follow the paths laid out before them. For those with memories of this remarkable era, there is always more history to explore.